So I mentioned earlier about Sargon II having constructed a palace at a place called Khorsabad, and there were some French archaeologists who were looking for Nineveh, and they stumbled across Khorsabad instead, and so they excavated the site, and that's why if you go to the Louvre in Paris, where incidentally you have to pay to get in, unlike the British Museum, which is, we're welcoming free to all people, although we should probably charge the French because they anyway. But if you go to the Louvre, they have an extensive collection of artifacts from Khorsabad, where Sargon. Now, there were these two rather large human-headed bulls weighing about 16 tons, and they couldn't work out how to get them home, so they let the British take them. And we took them and we cut them in, I say we, not personally, okay, none of us here, but we cut them into 6 pieces. You can see where they've been sawn into these 6 pieces and transported on a ship and reassembled, and here they are. But these are some of the few exhibits that we have from Khorsabad. A number of years ago, there was a carving discovered here, which is basically, it's a board game, probably carving made by Assyrian guards all those years ago, maybe on duty, and there's a game that's very similar to it upstairs. It's quite an ancient game, and it seems that that's maybe what they were playing here. Just around the corner to the left, we won't stop there, we'll walk past, but you can at least nod your head in acknowledgement. You'll find Sargon II with his son Sennacherib. Remember, it was the death of Sargon that brought about the rebellion from the southern kingdom of Judah, which later led to Sennacherib invading Judah and virtually destroying it. The last city that he did destroy being, of course, Lachish. Oh, and there's a panel over here which also mentions Hezekiah, but more of that another time. So as we go past here, look on the left, you should see Sargon and his son Sennacherib. We're going to go straight ahead for a very brief stop into the world of Greece. Okay, us here, and apologies to the ladies, but behind us here we have the base of one of the pillars from the Temple of Artemis from Ephesus. So this is completely out of any sort of sequence. This is sort of New Testament times, as it were. But there were 127 pillars supporting what was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, the Temple of Diana, there in Ephesus. And this was certainly standing at the time that Paul would have been in Ephesus. During, he spent a couple of years there, altogether 3 years in Ephesus. He would certainly have been very familiar with the temple, and there are allusions to that in the letter that he writes to them later. This is the base of one of those pillars, one of the decorated pillars. From there are other bits of the Temple of Artemis sort of down in the basement and what have you. If you go to Ephesus today, you won't see as much of the temple as you would see here. So funny that, isn't it? Really? Yes. Yeah. We're just looking after it. They show the construction of one of these human-headed winged creatures. But they're quite vague. There is down here sort of a line drawing representing them, but you might be able to see, certainly just down there to your right, that one's being excavated and then they're being transported. And here, this is a picture of them being pulled by ropes. And what's of interest here, perhaps, is that this row here, these are Israelites. They're Israelite slaves in Assyria being made to work on these huge building projects. Okay, we know they're Israelite slaves simply by the headwear. It matches with what we've seen earlier at Lachish and also at Ashtaroth at the Tiglath-Pileser's panel there. So again, coming down here, you can see lying down here one of these human heavy-winged creatures. This is basically showing from Sennacherib Palace, showing his construction expertise and what have you. We'll just quickly mention these here. This is a Phoenician warship. Again, this is from Sennacherib's palace, and it's worth noting as we pass by the end here. It's worth noticing the charred panels here, almost certainly a result of the destruction of Nineveh by the Babylonians and the Medes, as predicted by the prophet Nahum. He spoke of the city being scorched, and here's evidence of that from the palace of Sennacherib there in Nineveh. And so from the fire that consumes the city.
Sorry, but this is just kind of sort of an aside as far as skills. All the skills that we have are built upon those of generations that have gone before. We didn't have to invent the wheel; that was already done for us, and what have you, and on and on. So there's so much that we take for granted. But you go back to some of these earlier civilizations, and there are phases during which there seems to be declines as well as growth in technology and what have you. It does sort of go through various phases. But generally, they were pretty smart and some very skilled work. I mean, look, some of the detail of some of these pieces of pottery here. These are predominantly early Bronze Age, not exclusively, but predominantly early Bronze Age pottery. And some of the early Bronze Age pottery is a little finer than some of it in the Middle Bronze, and some of that is, so you don't necessarily have a constant progression. It does, and of course it varies from place to place as well. But pottery is, from an archaeological point of view, is fascinating because it helps to show the way of trade. So you'll find at a certain point within the Levant, within the eastern Mediterranean area, you begin to have influences from Cyprus. So you have various Cypriot ware that's coming in, that's being imported and then trading, and then you find the Philistine influences as well. So all of this paints the picture, builds the picture up of the way that these societies developed over the centuries. Now, there are a number of significant articles that I want to point out in this room, particularly. One could spend an entire day here with no problem at all. So there's lots of other bits to look at. We saw a little oil lamp in there. There are some oil lamps behind us here, and you'll notice that there are some four-spouted lamps, and these are generally found only within the early Bronze Age 4 period. And there is a theory as to why this might be, why they would have these four-spouted lamps. I don't think it's completely solid, the theory, but the theory is that there seems to have been a shortage of olive oil, and so they were compelled to use fish oil in their lamps. Fish oil, apparently, well, you may know this anyway, doesn't burn as brightly as olive oil, so they needed more spouts with more wicks. And so the spouts on the lamps here, this is where the wick would have been laid in the bottom of the oil in the main container, and then you would light it, and that's it. So the four-spout lamps, typically they're in the early Bronze Age 4 period. Now, we'll have a look at a few other bits and bobs as we come along. There we go. Excellent. Let's see. Let's take a look at so much here. Well, these letters up on the wall here, written on clay, they're clay tablets, you might recognize the kind of script there. This cuneiform type script. These are known as the Amarna letters. This is only a part of a larger collection of letters that were discovered there at Amarna. We mentioned earlier how that was the capital that was built by Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten. We spoke a little bit of the Amarna heresy, how that he had attempted to introduce the form of monotheism within Egyptian worship. Now, these letters here record communication between the Egyptian rulers and the local vassal state leaders, including those within the land of Canaan, in the period leading up to and possibly also during the conquest by Joshua. And there is evidence suggesting that the Hebrews are intended by a group that are known as the Habaru, and that these were the foreigners who had come into the land, and that would certainly very well fit the biblical picture of the Israelites coming in at the time of Joshua. So they helped to shed a little bit of light on the life within what became known as Holy Land, Israel, prior to the occupation. There really are so many things here. There's these. So we're here. These are essentially some late Bronze Age. I mentioned about imports from Cyprus. So here we have some Cypriot pottery. Quite fascinating. This one at the front here. This is known as a base ring vase, it is. It was thought for a long time, they're also known as bilbills, by the way, but it was thought for a long time that they were used for carrying poppy seeds and what have you, basically sort of what we would now understand like heroin kind of idea. But no evidence has been found, although I do believe that they still have maybe not. This is it. So when inverted, bear a striking resemblance to poppy heads if you turned it upside down its head. And it's thought that they were imported containing opium for medicinal purposes. However, archaeological studies of a number of these have not found that the evidence doesn't support that. I mentioned earlier that I worked for a month on the dig at Tel Beth Shemesh, and quite a number of these had been found there over the years, and on examination none of them contained any evidence of opium at all. So do with all of that as you will. It was sort of a nice, or not so nice, I don't know, idea, but there we go. Archaeologists can only go on, the evidence that exists now, and only sort of assume, work back to what might have taken place long ago. So we're going to move on here. Some delightful late bronze painted ware, and let's take a look at. I don't remember exactly all that we have on the leaflet there, but. Notice this thing here. This is a sensor here. This sort of there's this on a column here that would have been used probably within some kind of religious ceremony. What do we have next on our list that we must point out? Where are we at? There we go. We've gone with all the Amarna letters. Oh, the figurines from Lachish. Sort of marvellous. Here we go. We were at Lachish, just downstairs, witnessing its destruction at the hand of the Assyrian king Sennacherib during the time of the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, during the days of the prophet Isaiah. So from that kind of era, we have these artifacts here. Now, the one at the front one here, anybody have a guess at what that piece is? I'm going to cover up, I'm not sure if it mentions what it is or not, but the thing at the front there looks like a long cylinder. What is that? Does it look like anything at all? Any sort of
Dog bone.
a dog bone, a dog toy or something, is it? Yeah, cotton reel. Some people. It's a rattle. It's a rattle. In fact, I found a piece of one of these at Tel Beth Shemesh, and it's generally assumed that they were used within religious ceremonies. The one that we found there was located very close to a very small sort of temple complex. So it seems that they were used in some kind of religious ceremonies. But you look at the other artifacts here, and they are all household gods. Now the question must arise, why are there household gods within the homes of Judahites, of Israelites, during the reign of the kings of Israel? I mean, were they not all to be worshipping Yahweh, the God of Israel? Well, that's what they were to be doing, but the text clearly shows that they were full of idolatry. Their hearts were full of idolatry. And this sort of thing, this is clear evidence of that. And figures like these have been discovered throughout the land of Israel. So illustrative of the continued idolatrous practices within Israel long after they should have been long eradicated from their lives. There are some ivories from Samaria after the time of Ahab, perhaps illustrative of his ivory palace. These pieces of ivory would have been found within pieces of furniture for decorative purposes, and if you had this kind of thing, then you obviously had money. Now, over here, from again the same sort of era, but very specifically dated to the reign of King Hezekiah, we have some jar handles. These are known as Lamellic jar handles because they bear the writing on it. Lamellic means belonging to the king, and then there are other letters indicating where the storehouses were in which these jars would have been housed. Hezekiah was a very capable king. Very highly organized. It was during his reign, you may recall, that the tunnel was dug from the pool of Siloam to the ancient city in order to provide a water supply during the Assyrian attacks. So he was very well organized, and part of that organization was his storage cities, and these jar handles here, specifically dated to the reign of Hezekiah, record the various cities in which they list them there. There's Hebron, Ziph, Soko, and Mobshit, and these are the storage cities during the reign of King Hezekiah. Now, we'll come back to those in a moment, but you look up here and there is a fascinating piece of rock, and there's some writing on it. And so the writing here, this is in Aramaic, it's a Paleo-Hebrew text, and it was the lintel from a rock-cut tomb. And there's a name that appears on it, but most of it's been obliterated. But the end of the name is Aya. Another part of the text tells us that the person for whom this tomb was cut was a royal steward. If you look in the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 22, you'll read of a chap called Shebna, whose full name was most likely Shebaniah. He was a royal steward, but he was deposed from his position for his arrogance in constructing for himself a rock-cut tomb. Now, I don't think we can be 100% sure, but I'm roughly 97.63% sure that this is the lintel from the tomb that was cut by Shebna, the royal steward of Hezekiah, spoken of by the prophet Isaiah in chapter 22 of his book.
And yes, he was also a foreigner, and so that sort of even heightened the arrogance of having carved for himself this tomb, wanted to make a name for himself. Well, he certainly did make a name for himself, but not in the way that he might have chosen. So all this again, dating from the time of Isaiah, the time of King Hezekiah. We're going to fast forward over 100 years. Downstairs we were looking at the siege of Lachish and how that the Assyrians almost brought about the downfall of the southern kingdom of Judah. But they did not succeed. God would not allow them to do that. It was about 150 years later when the Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, came against Jerusalem, and it was a rather protracted series of events, but eventually brought down the southern kingdom of Judah. The last city to be destroyed was Jerusalem. It fell in 586 BC. The city to fall before that was the second most, Lachish indeed, and excavations at Lachish in the guardhouse. There, in fact, it's continued to be excavated even in recent times. It was a typical Iron Age staggered guardhouse. You basically didn't simply go straight in. You had to go in at an angle, turn around through one set of gates and through another set of gates. The idea being that once you'd passed through the first set of gates, you were kind of sitting ducks for whatever was going to be thrown upon. That's why the Assyrians built a siege ramp. It was a lot easier to make your own entrance into the city than to rely upon the one that the occupants provided, because they well guarded that. Well, in the guardhouse, at the time of the Babylonian conquest of Judah, a number of letters were found. And you see, these are described as the Lachish letters. So they're 6th century BC, the early part of the 6th century BC, and leading up to the time when the southern kingdom fell in 586. So again, we're after the time of the Assyrians. These letters are written to local commanders. Basically, within them, the idea is help. We are being attacked. One of them makes reference to another city very close by called Azekah, and says that they can only see the beacons there of Lachish and Azekah, and then it goes on to say we can no longer see the beacons from Azekah, implying that that city had fallen. Lachish was next on the list, and once it had fallen, then the Babylonians, then they overran the city of Jerusalem itself, and that was the end of the kingdom of Judah. Well, the rest is history. In fact, it's all been history, hasn't it? But there we go. So, the Lachish letter, incidentally, one of them also mentions the name Yahweh, what's sometimes referred to as the tetragrammaton, the name of God found within. I think I put a couple of quotes in the leaflets that you have, so you can look back to those also. A number of other little bits and bobs. Here are some weights from Lachish. We've already passed by a number of seals. Some of them were scarab seals, which are like inverted beetles, with some of those we've seen down there. In fact, I discovered one of those at Beth Shemesh, evidence of continued trade with the Egyptians. There's so many things we could discuss here, but I don't want to send you all to sleep, okay? You're doing very well so far. Anybody got any questions or anything? We doing okay? Are we...
I was just going to ask if we can find the word Yahweh or whatever on each of those letters and which line.
I will leave you to try that later. Okay, so again we have a similar Hebrew script, okay, that we have, and written on what these are generally referred to as potsherds or ostraca. So they're just broken bits of pottery, and when the local stationer's shop is closed, that's what you have to revert to. Lots of letters and things written on this sort of stuff, because it was handy. You've got a broken pot, what do you do with it? You write a letter. There we are. So that's it. Yeah. But I do have in my collection a potsherd from Lachish, but there's no writing on it.
not yet anyway. So, right. Okay. No, jolly good. I hope all of that is crystal clear. Hi, John. This is for the ladies, okay. Here we have, this is a reconstruction. The origin, including the remains of the one who was last seen wearing it, is down here, okay. But chaps, if you're looking for something to buy for the ladies for Christmas, this is the latest fashion. Absolutely phenomenal. So are we all here?
It looks like some geometry.
Are we all here? We've got rear guards over there. Okay, great.
Mathematical study.
Yeah, so we're talking about how clever people work. There we go. We've got some mathematical tablet here, and if only we could read the writing. Yeah, that's it. When you become a fully qualified cuneiformist, you can bring us all back here and tell us what everything says. Okay. So we've got a selection of. I mean, this is just there are thousands of these in the collection at the museum. We've got a selection of it. We've got a Babylonian story of the flood. Every ancient civilization has a story of the flood. Not surprisingly, you know, it affected the world, the whole world in which we live. We got omens from a sheep's stomach. Now, how many times would we have found that useful in our goings on? What I want to draw particular attention to here is this one on the top left. It is another omen tablet, and it's an inscribed model of a sheep's liver. Now, incredibly useful, you might be thinking, and you'd be absolutely right. If you were a Babylonian, particularly somebody who was looking for some kind of guidance, some kind of direct, as was Nebuchadnezzar, Ezekiel speaks of him coming to a fork in the roads. Which way does he go? Does he go to Judah, or does he go to Ammon? Can't make up his mind, so he consults the household gods, he consults the arrows, he consults the liver, which means going to the priest. The priest would then take an animal, would then kill it, would extract the liver, would examine the liver in order to determine what should be his next course of action. Well, how does he know? How does he know how to interpret the liver? Well, he would have known what all of this meant, and he would have known wherever there was a blemish, then there was a little sort of message that indicated what this implied. And they actually believed in this stuff, you know?
I think reading tea leaves is easier.
Yeah. Or even your horoscope in the daily newspaper. I mean, it's all a complete lot of nonsense. But it just shows the longing that people have for answers, for direction, for guidance. And are we not so blessed that God has, revealed himself to us and given us his word? But that's the kind of thing. So this would have been a sort of an essential part of priests' trainings. We've got lunar eclipse omens. Again, terribly useful if you are into that sort of thing, and on and on. So fascinating. All the different kinds of things that we could imagine that they would have written. We'll find examples: bird omens, dream omens. Yeah, the likes of the wise men trying to interpret the dreams. In Egypt, and then of course later with Daniel, and if you want to know anything, always best to ask God. And that, of course, was the message over and over again that we find within Scripture. So, just a tiny little document, as it were, just a bit of education for those the religious classes in order to help them do their stuff in the museum. And and they even found some rules to go with it. So, I think it's just there. There you go, that's it. It's way time. There we go. Got a couple more things in this next room, and then we'll be coming very close to the end. Where Sennacherib speaks of destroying 46 of the fortified strong cities of Judah, along with their nearby villages, and building the earth siege ramps and using battering rams and what have you. And all of that is from this document here, the Taylor Prism here. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. Very fine writing there, which Monday will interpret for us a little later. Now over here we have this splendid brick panel from the throne room of Nebuchadnezzar. He's the chap who brings down Jerusalem in 586 BC. At the time of Jeremiah the prophet, he's still there. By that time, the prophet Ezekiel is already in the land of Babylon.
Well, he's part of it. Normally they make like metal alloys to make silver. Yeah. So they mix.
These tablets here, it's worth having a little, like I say, rummage, at least having a look and seeing what kind of things they are. Of particular interest in this area, on the other side, it's maybe a little clearer now. So we've got Ashurbanipal's flood tablet. So we mentioned earlier how that we have flood tablets from many ancient civilizations. This is part of what was known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, I think there's a little bit more detail in the leaflets, okay? Feel free. So over here we have a couple of tablets, a couple of clay tablets. One records the final years of Judah. The one there on the left, it's a Babylonian chronicle recording the downfall of Judah. And the one to the right, that small tablet there to the right, is known for recording the name of an individual mentioned also by the prophet Jeremiah. In his book. And then just over there in the case in the corner, a rather square-looking dark brick is inscribed with the name of King Nebuchadnezzar, built into a foundation, and it commemorates his restoration of a number of temples.
In quite a lot of different ways is Baal, but of course as a storm god, acute embarrassment during the time of Elijah, when when they weren't able to get Baal to set light to his altar. Of course, Elijah comes along, has the whole thing doused with water, and it's the God of heaven and earth who brings down the fire from the.
He's not anybody that we know. He's just seemingly a god, but this glazed panel here was from Susa. Yeah,
China.
Esther. Nehemiah. Nehemiah would very likely have seen this, as too would Esther. That's where they hung out, as it were. Just an interesting, rather colourful exhibit there from Susa, there within the Persian period. So then we're going to have a look at the final artifact. It is the Cyrus cylinder. And this cylinder contains it's sometimes regarded as the first sort of document of civil rights, human rights, as it were. It contains edict, for want of a better term, which enabled those who had been taken captive by the Babylonians, now under the reign of Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, enabled them to return to their homelands. It doesn't specifically mention Israel or Judah or Jerusalem, but it was this policy recorded within this document that enabled Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and, to return to Jerusalem, to rebuild the city, to rebuild the temple. And so here, dating from Cyrus the Great, who is spoken of course, by the prophet Isaiah many years before his time as the anointed one of God. So there is what is generally simply known as the Cyrus Cylinder. But a very, politically also a very key document in sort of this idea of human civil rights, as it were, laid out here. So that essentially brings us to the end of our official tour, looking at artifacts from various points of history, from various civilizations, illustrating to one degree or another the biblical story. And I hope it's been of some interest, some use somewhere along the line. I want to stress this before we sort of wrap things up, and that is that the most accurate, most authentic record of history is not found within artifacts, but within the Word of God Himself. We don't look at artifacts to see whether Scripture is true. We look at artifacts to illustrate what we know is true, for it's been breathed out by the Word of God. I think that's terribly important. And if we find ever that secular historical records don't tally with the Bible, I know which one I'm going to regard as being the most authentic. Okay? It's kind of like we looked at that Egyptian king list earlier, and we know what's really going on, all right? And we're living in a world today in which we're bombarded with so many alternative narratives, so many different ways of looking at the world and understanding life. I hope that we understand that it's only through Jesus that we're able to see what really is going on and who it is that we